undercover cop cornered him and said, "Oh, you didn't think that this could last." Jan jumped up out of bed, said, "There's someplace I gotta go." She took a gun out of the drawer and said, "It's best if you don't know." The undercover cop was found face down in a field. The monkey man was on the river bridge using Tweeter as a shield. Jan said to the monkey man, "I'm not fooled by Tweeter's skull. I knew him long before he ever became a Jersey girl." And the walls came down all the way to hell. Never saw them when they're standing, never saw them when they fell. Now the town of Jersey City is quieting down again. I'm sitting in a gambling club called the Lion's Den. The TV set was blown up, every bit of it is gone. Ever since the nightly news show that the Monkey Man was on. I guess I'll go to Florida and get myself some sun. There ain't no more opportunity here, everything been done. Sometimes I think of Tweeter, sometimes I think of Jan. Sometimes I go think about nothing but the Monkey Man. And the walls came down all the way to hell. Never saw them when they're standing, never saw them when they fell. And the walls came down all the way to hell. Never saw them when they're standing, never saw them when they fell. Well, I took a walk around the world to ease my troubled mind. I left my body lying somewhere in the sands of time. But I watched the world float to the dark side of the moon. I feel there's nothing I can do. I watched the world float to the dark side of the moon. After all, I knew it had to be something to do with you. I really don't mind what happens now and then, as long as you'll be my friend at the end. If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman? If I'm alive, then well, will you be there holding my hand? I'll keep you by my side, be my superhuman, my kryptonite. You call me strong, you call me weak, but still your secrets I will keep. You took for granted all the times I never let you down. You stumbled in and bumped your head. If not for me, then you'd be dead. I picked you up, put you back on solid ground. If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman? If I'm alive and well, will you be there holding my hand? I'll keep you by my side with my superhuman might, kryptonite. If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman? If I'm alive and well, will you be there holding my hand? I'll keep you by my side with my superhuman mind, kryptonite. Yeah! If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman? If I'm alive and well, will you be there holding my hand? I'll keep you by my side with my superhuman might, kryptonite.
Well, what an incredible afternoon. Thanks all y'all for coming down. Friends, very sad occasion today, but we gather today to commit Peter David Quintal to his final resting place. On behalf of the Quintal family, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today to share this moment of grief with them. To Peter's father Shane, it must be very difficult. Peter's partner Carissa and children Taj and Mim, as well as his uncles and aunts, nieces and nephews. Our love and condolences go out to you all. This service this afternoon has an added additional meaning to it today, as Pete's mother, Kay Sandra Quintal Harvey, who was born on the 2nd of March 1957 and sadly passed away on the 17th of April 2021, her ashes will be interred with Peter this afternoon. Peter was only a young man. He was born on the 11th of December 1980. A young man who had just so much to live for, but sadly passed away on the 23rd of October 2024. His passing was just a few days ago, surrounded by his family and his friends, and with so much love. Excuse me. Today, we gather to comfort each other in our grief and to celebrate the life Peter led as he passes from this world. Although his life was cut short during his time with us all, he had so much happiness, sadness, laughter, love, plenty of good times, and some not so good. This is the way we'll always remember Peter. A life that was taken away before he and we were ready. A short 43 years of age. Peter will leave a large hole in the lives of his family and all those who loved him. But it will be our memories of him that will keep us all strong. Our thoughts are with his family today. And just a short note on the service format for today, in line with Peter's non-religious wishes, there won't be any hymns sung today. Next on the list is Kelly Smith. She's going to read some messages and tributes, and then she'll follow that up with the eulogy. Thank you, Kelly.
There. All right, I've got a few messages to read from different people that couldn't make it today. The first one is from Fassie and Deb. Dear Carissa, Taj and Mim, our hearts are with you during this heartbreaking time. Pete was a great friend, even travelling overseas to be with us on our special day. A gesture we're forever grateful for and a treasured memory we'll hold on to. He fought a long, hard battle with incredible strength and resilience. We wish we found the same courage to reach out earlier. Please know he'll never be forgotten. His strength, kindness and love live on in you. We're here for you, holding you close in our thoughts and prayers. Rest in peace, from Deb and Fassie. This message is written by Libby on behalf of her 2 children, Jaden and Nash. Pete, what a man you were. Reflecting on the time our paths crossed brings me a sense of gratitude and warmth, even amidst the sorrow. I was fortunate enough to find you and Carissa during a particularly difficult chapter in my life, just weeks after losing my partner. When we met at the Narang skate park, it felt like fate had intervened, and little did I know how much you both would come to mean to me. Over these last 4 years, you not only became my best friends, but also a beacon of hope and joy in my life. You embodied the qualities of a great friend, a devoted father, and a loving husband. Your kindness and infectious laughter created moments that I will carry with me forever. It's incredible to think about the memories we've made together, the late night talks, shared laughs, and the unwavering support you provided when I needed it most. I will always be grateful for that day we met and for the light you brought into my life. As we all come to terms with this profound loss, my heart goes out to Carissa, Mim, Taj, and everyone in the Norfolk Island community who is mourning your passing. In this time of grief, know that my thoughts and prayers are with you all. Pete, your spirit lives on in the love you shared and in the lives you touched. Fly high in paradise, my friend. Until we meet again, I will cherish every moment we have together. Can you hold those, please? Thank you. Next one's from Joe McNaughton. I only had the privilege of hanging out with Pete a few times. Back in 2011 was when I first got to meet Pete. I could feel straight away that this dude was genuine, so easy to talk to about all kinds of random things. That instant connection with him made me feel like I'd known him forever, like a brother I'd never met before. The way he spoke about his family, Carissa, Mim and Taj, said everything about him, a man who loved his family and was a very proud dad. As my time on the island was coming to an end, just as fast as the beers were flowing, I started to feel sadness come over me. I didn't want to leave that beautiful place and the amazing new friends I'd made, who felt more like family. I can't remember how long it was until I got to return, maybe a couple of years, but Pete and Carissa always kept in touch, giving me updates on the kids and how Taj was doing on his dirt bike. I couldn't wait to get back and see everyone. Pete, this one might get you in trouble, but fuck it. We finally touched down on the island, and this time there were more of us. The whole time during the lead up to this trip, I couldn't stop telling all the boys how epic this island is and how awesome the people are. By this time, they were all just as amped as I was to hit the ground. We grabbed our bags, sorted the hire vehicles and took off. I felt like I was home again and couldn't wait to show the boys around and see everyone who made that island feel like home for me. We headed towards Emily Bay and found one of those little trucks you guys drive around in. It was parked up under a tree and I pulled up next to it hoping to see a familiar face. To my surprise, it was Pete. I was so stoked. We had a good laugh and a good catch up. I asked him what he was up to and he replied, "I've had enough today, so I'm hiding from my boss." We all cracked up and left him to it. We didn't want to give his position away. As we drove off, I heard him yell, "Catch up for a beer later." Fucking oath, brother. We got to catch up over many more beers after that, and it was always easy to just hang out and talk with Pete. He asked me one day if I'd mind spending some time with them and do some riding with Taj. I jumped at the opportunity to hang out with a family that felt like my own. A few quiet beers, dirt bikes and good company. That's my kind of day. Pete couldn't thank me enough, but in my eyes, it was the other way around. Connections and times like that is what made those trips to the island so special. I will never forget that day. Events, dirt bikes, shows and all the hype that comes with it come and go, but the connections and friendships last forever. Pete, I didn't get to know you my whole life, but it feels like I did. I want to thank you for being you and for treating me like family. You're a brother from another mother, and I'll never forget you, my friend. Rest easy, brother. Mim and Taj, your dad was a legend. He loved you more than anyone could ever explain, and he was so proud of you. Carissa, you're a legend, and you were Pete's rock. You and your family have made an impact on my life, and you will always have a home in my heart. Sending all my love, Joey. Thank you. This one's from Nath. Although this journey's over, another now begins. Your memory will live forever through Carissa, Taj and Mim. Your journey's been a tough one. You've fought a mighty fight, but it's a time for rest in peace now and time for tell good night. Rest easy, Brad, and thanks for me. Our time has been a blessing. What I learned from you in our time are skills well worth possessing. It's not goodbye forever, 'cause our paths will cross again. Enjoy whatever lies ahead until we meet again. Love you, Brad. Lila's going to read something that Mim's written for her dad.
Dad, I can't believe the time has come. You've gained your wings and now resting in eternal peace. I'm going to miss the times we had, laughing about anything and everything. And teaming up on Mum in arguments was pretty fun. Till she got that angry she had steam coming out of her ears. I'll miss you doing my hair for school most mornings. I'm going to miss you so much, Dad. But I won't miss the unnecessary sassy comments like, "It's not a fashion show, Mim." Even though you're not here in person, you're always going to be in my heart. I love you so much, Dad, and I'm going to miss you like crazy.
Eulogy. Before I start, I'd like to share a little irony with you all. Pete always liked to keep things simple. He was never one to make a big fuss about himself, and he always told people that once I started talking, it was hard to shut me up. So heads up now, Yorley, I'm not going to keep this short or simple. I will make a big fuss about Pete, and once I get started, no one will be able to shut me up until I'm done. So thanks, Carice, for putting me in the driver's seat up here today. And as Pete would say, get comfy, Yorley, we'll be here a while. Peter, Pete, Petey, Princess, Cuz, Bungai, Henry, Jeepers, Cutie, Peter Pan, Boopsy, Mite, Rat, Darlin, Uncle Pete, Dad. It really didn't matter what you called him. Peter David Quintal was one of the best. Born exactly 9 months to the day after his father's birthday, Peter David Quintal entered the world on the 11th of December 1980 on Norfolk Island. A little bundle of joy for his father Shane Buffett Quintal and mother Kay Sandra Quintal, née Clark. As a young child, Pete grew up surrounded by some of Norfolk's finest. He had fond memories of time spent with his grandparents, Buff, Thornton George Ellis, and Barbara Quintal. In these early years, along with Buff and Barb and his mum and dad, Pete was raised by a village consisting of the extended Buffett and Schmitz families and many other close family friends. Within this village, before Pete could even walk, he began to receive an unusual education. At regular get-togethers at Buff or Carl's, a very young Pete watched and learned as they introduced him to the fine art of socialising. There was always joking and laughter, sweet weddles, good tunes, and plenty of pranking, as these Norfolk icons solved the problems of the world over a carton of beer or a few bottles of Carl's homemade Porpay wine. A very young Pete saw it all, along with his sidekick Michelle, known then as Missy, and any other kids who were lucky enough to receive a similar education at the time. Through these social interactions, Pete learned to mix with adults at a very young age, as he was introduced to good times, true friendship and loyalty, and an endless supply of practical jokes and laughter. Pete very soon began to mirror these same traits as he shaped into the fun-loving person we all came to know and love. Traits that Pete carried with him for the rest of his life. He was always up for a good time, always loyal to those he cared about, and always had a wicked sense of humour. Pete's mum and dad separated when Pete was a toddler. He then moved off Norfolk with his mum when she returned to live in New Zealand. After about 18 months in New Zealand, Pete moved back to live with his dad on Norfolk, as his mum had decided that Norfolk would be the best place for Pete to grow up. As a child, Pete made memories continuing to visit his mum in New Zealand for holidays, and although he didn't see her often, he did miss his mum a lot. His mum missed him too, and she was always grateful to Shane for caring for Pete and providing him with the childhood that only Norfolk could offer. Living back on Norfolk, Pete began to spend more time with his grandparents, Buff and Barb, as they became even more influential in his life. Barb loved having Pete around, and as she wasn't working, she often looked after Pete in the daytimes. Barb and Pete would spend hours together doing all the things a grandmother does with her grandson. But it was when Barb tried to teach Pete to knit that Buff quickly stepped in. He wouldn't hear of his grandson knitting, so he threw Pete in the front seat of his work truck and started taking Pete to work with him. While most of his friends were playing with toy trucks, Pete thought he's so big. He had the real deal, and he loved driving around with Buff. So, it turned out Shane had a thing for K's, and a few years after Pete's mum, Kay, left Norfolk, Shane and Pete moved in with Kay Pendleton out New Farm Road. Pete was around 8 years old. From here, New Farm Road came to hold many lifetime memories for Pete as Kay began to play a significant part in his life. Pete got on well with the new Kay, and she'd often pick him up from Barb's after work. They had fun spending time together, especially when Shane was away, and Pete was always stoked when she'd give him $2 to go and spend in town. Kay did well navigating her new role as Pete's stepmum, and Pete loved having Kay in his life. Now, living so far out of town, Pete's pushbike ride to school had increased significantly. So Pete would cunningly time his pedal to school with the time that John Robinson was heading into work. And what do you know? John would always stop and give Pete and his pushy a lift into town. Pete learned to drive very early in life, and as a young boy, he was often the sober Bob driver, driving his dad home after a night out long before he ever had a licence, which was common practice back in the 80s. A few years later, when Pete got his licence, until he could no longer drive last year, Pete could always be relied on to drop people home late at night. Yes, still the late night driver, but unfortunately very rarely a sober one by then. As a young boy, Pete attended many car demolition parties with his dad, his uncles and their friends in various paddocks around Norfolk. One particularly memorable one was the funeral of Pete's Uncle Tim's car, Noreen. Some might say they took things a little far, dressing in suits and ties and holding funeral proceedings before riding off poor Noreen in the paddock behind Banyan Park. But young Pete had a great time as he watched on with interest and excitement. It must have made an impression on Pete because not long after, on a separate occasion, Pete was allowed to drive one of Shane's old cars in their paddock. There was a crowd, similar to Noreen's demolition party, but it wasn't a demolition party. At least not until Pete accidentally jammed the car in between two trees, much to the amusement of all those looking on. And that wasn't the last time Pete was responsible for a vehicle demolition. No, later there was a Starlet that went through a fence, Brit's newly registered MX-5 that met an untimely death, Geek's Red Townie that died in a creek, Geek's White Familiar that was ruined by a silent cop, Shane's 350 motorbike that Pete and Leith destroyed, and my beloved Silver Lancer that Pete managed to ride off twice. As a youngster, though, Pete loved riding his pushy and would often be seen cruising around, more often than not, wheel standing through town. Yes, Pete had a love of all things with wheels: push bikes, motorbikes, cars, skateboards, mowers, trucks, and later on, bobcats and excavators. There was nothing with wheels that Pete didn't master over the years, and there was no road, dirt track, hill, beach, or golf course on Norfolk that he hadn't covered in one vehicle or another. Pete gained a few nicknames in those early years. His grandpa Buff lovingly nicknamed him Henry, a name that a few people still refer to him by. Boopsy came from his Uncle Tum and best mate Ernie Christian, as they mimicked the boop 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 noise baby Pete would make in his cot. In primary school, Pete was given the nickname Rat, which stuck with him throughout school and beyond. Now, Pete loved being around his friends, and they were all usually up to some kind of mischief. But believe it or not, Pete very rarely missed a day of going to school. Not because he liked school, but for the simple fact that his mates were there. Whether they actually stayed at school all day or not, Shane and Kay were never quite sure. But I can confirm that before and after school, you'd usually find Peter over at the banyan tree, yep, you guessed it, socialising, among the other things that the banyan tree was well known for. Having spent the first 13 years as an only child, Pete was stoked to gain a younger brother when Alan was born to Shane and Kay Pendleton in September 1993. In an unexpected turn of events, however, over the next few years, Pete continued to gain siblings at quite a rapid rate. And in a few short years, Pete went from being an only child to being one of, well, not even Shane can tell us how many. But Pete was such a doting big brother to Al, and he took his new role as big brother very seriously. Not long after, when Shane and Kay had made wills that included arrangements for baby Alan should anything happen to the two of them, 16-year-old Pete was very put out that they hadn't chosen him to care for Alan, telling Kay, no, if anything happened, I would look after Alan because I'm his big brother. Luckily, nothing happened to Shane and Kay. As a kid and young teen, Pete was never home. He was way too social for that. Religiously, we'd walk into town after school each day, go to foodies, and then hang out at the ramp until it got dark. Always joking around, Pete had all the foodies laughing one afternoon when he picked me up by the legs and threw me head first into the used cardboard boxes near the checkout. Not as strong as Pete, I got him back later by bending his finger back until he cried. When the other boys gave him grief that a girl made him cry, Pete replied, "You would have cried too if she bent your fingers back." A sentiment he stood by for the next 30 years. After hanging out all afternoon together, when we got home, Pete and I would ring each other and talk for hours on the landline phone connected to the dining room wall. Night after night, our parents had to put up with us lying on the floor talking on the phone. When we got hungry, we'd leave the phone hanging off the hook, go make a feed, return to our call, eat together and continue talking crap. Luckily, local calls were free back then. It was at this point that Pete became one of my best friends as we helped each other get through the harder parts of our young lives. Over time, Pete and I became more like family than friends as we loved and fought like siblings over the years, and I will be forever grateful for every moment. At school, Pete was always popular with his classmates, and then some. Being a people person, he also had friends in every other class in the school. Pete was a talented junior rugby league player, representing Norfolk Island on a couple of occasions in the 90s. He enjoyed basketball, back when it was played in Rawson Hall, and was part of the first cohort of touch footy players when touch was introduced on Norfolk, also in the late 90s. Later, as an adult, Pete continued playing touch. He also often played in social mixed netball comps, although he wasn't as good on the court as he was on the steps afterwards, usually into the early hours of the next morning. Pete always enjoyed the social side of sport, and he was also pretty good at beer pong. Never home, a social teenager Pete would rise to almost any challenge, no matter how dangerous or how illegal. And throughout those years, I only ever remember Pete being scared of two things: Shane finding out about what he'd been up to, and us girls dyeing his beautiful blonde hair, which we never managed to do. Shane was a strict dad and would set strict rules, but Pete was good at bending the rules. Before he got his licence, Pete wasn't allowed in cars with young drivers, but not wanting to miss out on a good time, Pete would go in cars. He wasn't allowed, but he'd be sure to lie down across the back seat when he drove past Carver, where Shane or his workmates might see. He'd often sneak out at night, first for late night walks on the airport runway with mates, then later to go to parties where he was always the last to leave. They say it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, by this point, with his outgoing nature, Pete seemed to know everyone, and everyone knew Pete. This came in pretty handy, and through Pete we could get access to almost anything. Invitations to parties, alcohol to drink at parties, and of course, before we had licences, lifts to and from parties at any time of day or night. Pete finished school in December 1996 at the end of Year 10 and went straight into working for Richard Quintal at the block factory. He didn't get 6-week school holidays like all his mates, but he enjoyed working at the factory and learned a lot from Richard Quintal and Dino Buffett. Although it was hard work, he soon found that working life came with its own social scene, to which he fitted right in. And it was really no surprise that Pete's favourite time of the week was Friday afternoon drinks in Quintal's shed. Pete worked hard for the block factory, but he also played hard. And there was one day that Richard kicked Pete and Toddles off site for going to work still drunk. Sent home by Richard to think about things, they left the factory and went to the pub with my brother. I'm sure they all thought about a lot of things that afternoon, but I doubt that any of those things were what Richard had meant. In the July of 1999, when Pete was 18, the next and biggest chapter of his life began when him and Carissa finally hooked up. Carissa will tell you she'd had the hots for Pete her whole life. But although they'd been hanging out in the same circles of friends for years, Pete hadn't showed any interest in her until now. For the next 6 months, Pete snuck Carissa in and out of Shane and Kay's house late at night. Until in January 2000, Carissa shit herself when Kay told her they knew she'd been sneaking in all the time, so she may as well just move in with them. And that's exactly what Carissa did. For a year, Pete and Carissa lived out New Farm Road with Shane, Kay and Al. At this time, Carissa's little sister Brittany, who was also Al's best friend, spent much time out New Farm Road too. Many special memories were made during this time, but most significantly, this was when Pete and Britt's relationship deepened. The two of them shared a special connection. Pete understood Britt, Britt knew how to make Pete laugh, and she quickly became Pete's go-to whenever him and Carissa hooked. While living out New Farm Road, Pete almost brought Shane and Kay's house down one night, quite literally. Pete used to get the heebie-jeebies walking from the car at the bottom shed up to the house in the dark at night, so he would hurry up to the house quickly. One night when Pete and Carissa got home, he sagooed and said, "Take off, run up our hill." Well, he ran face first, clean into one of the external posts of the house. From their bedroom at the back, Shane and Kay felt the whole house shake. Mostly from Pete's head hitting it at full speed, but probably also partly from Carissa's laughter that echoed for miles. After a year out New Farm Road, Pete and Carissa moved to the old butcher shop down Cascade Road, living together on their own for the first time. During this time, Pete had a lot to do with not just Al, but also Brittany, Dylan, Whitney, Alice and Tennille, who were young kids at the time. They all came to love and admire Pete, as he had such a big influence on their young lives. Poor Tennille is still scarred from when she was 5 years old. Pete and Carissa had just flown over and gone to visit Liz. When they got out of the car at Matt Quintal's house in Ryde, an excited little Tennille pointed out it was full moon. "Full moon?" Pete said excitedly, before quickly ripping off his shirt and running down the streets of Ryde, howling like a wolf. As these kids got older, the fun with Pete continued, like when they were celebrating TGB's touch footy grand final win at Mitch's house. Pete and Britt disappeared, then came back with 2 hollowed-out basketballs stuck clean over their heads. In 2004, Pete finished working at the block factory when him and Carissa moved away to live in Mooloolaba on the sunny coast. Here Pete worked for Mocko and Leanne Snell at Palm Creek Concrete, where Pete expanded his concrete knowledge and skills, learning heaps from Mocko while also studying concreting through TAFE. Always making friends wherever he went, Pete made more lifelong mates during this time in Rednut, JJ and Bungai. The respect and love Pete earned from these mates was evident when JJ and Bungai flew to Norfolk to visit their mate in hospital just last week. Pete worked hard during this time, committed to his new job, and wouldn't take a day off, even though Chris often tried to persuade him to so they could go away for a couple of days. Pete's greatest achievement while working in Australia was when Palm Creek Concrete received the 2004 Best Commercial Building Award from the Housing Industry Association for the BMW car yard in Curramundi that they'd worked on. But life on the sunny coast wasn't all smooth sailing. Often after a day of concreting, Pete would show up at the pub that Carissa worked in to have a few drinks while he waited to get a lift home from her when she finished her shift. Trouble was, Carissa worked nights and her shift didn't usually finish till 2 or 3 a.m. Well, there went Carissa's pay each week. There was one night on their way home, Carissa had had enough, so she kicked Pete out of the car and told him to find his own way home. Instead, he rang one of the bouncers from where she worked, who quickly picked him up and took him out clubbing. Carissa was furious. Pete always had a deep appreciation for music that spanned many decades and many different genres. While living on the sunny coast, Pete and Chris started their big day out careers, and over the years together they attended 14 out of 20 of the big day out music festivals. They also attended several other concerts over the years. Pete's all-time favourite was when they saw Metallica live. Another highlight for Pete was when they took Britt, Soph and Tennille to their first ever big day out. There are countless memories and stories of good times had at concerts and festivals, usually with a crowd of good mates from Norfolk and away. Always a music lover, to this day all Pete's CDs are still stored at home in a folder in alphabetical order. Carissa relived some of their sunny coast memories recently when Leanne Snell brought back a bag they'd left up there 20 years ago. Among other things, there was a photo album full of memories, Pete's brand new XR600 manual, all their big day out tickets and programs, and a folder with Pete's concreting notes from TAFE. Pete and Carissa moved back home to Norfolk when Carissa was pregnant with Taj at the beginning of 2008. For about 10 years, Pete worked for the administration of Norfolk Island with the Roads Department. I'm told these were very entertaining times, Pete working alongside Danny, Hook, Tones, Snoop and Khan Christian, all under Tardy's ever-sensible supervision. Incredibly, Pete had landed himself in another particularly social workplace where after-work drinks at the depot or the brewery were pretty common. His workmates would often find Pete already at work in the mornings when they arrived. At first they thought it was because he was keen and he'd come into work early, but the truth was he either hadn't actually left from the night before, or if he had, Carissa had kicked him out when he got home, and so he'd gone back around and slept outside the depot. Needless to say, some very hungover road patching took place during that time. So there's a well-known saying, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Well, I thought surely 2 quintals wouldn't either. I mean a quintal and a quintal. Really, how long you thought that going to last? But by this point, Pete and Carissa had been together for nearly 10 years. And then these 2 quintals proved me wrong. They absolutely did get it right. Firstly in June 2008 when their son Taj was born, and again in October 2010 when their daughter Mim was born. This began the proudest part of Pete's journey yet, as he instantly fell in love with his children and his life began to revolve around them. Now, you could be forgiven for believing Taj was born on a motorbike. He wasn't. With Pete by Carissa's side, Taj was born in Westmead Public Hospital in Parramatta on June 12, 2008. Taj spent his first 14 days in intensive care, and 3 days after leaving hospital, at just 17 days old, Pete sat Taj on a motorbike for the first time. Pete soon taught Taj to ride a motorbike, even wheel stand it, long before Taj had even started school, and it's no secret that Taj inherited his dad's love of wheels, along with his talent for operating them. A passion that they shared together over the years, both on Norfolk and in Australia. Taj also inherited Pete's good looks, chilled personality, quick wit and sense of humour. Often arguing with his dad, Taj has been known to give Pete a good run for his money. Yeah, Taj is good, but there were times even recently when Pete was just too quick and Taj was put in his place. Mim was then born on October 27, 2010, also in Westmead Public Hospital in Parramatta. As Carissa went into labour 5 weeks early, Pete was still on Norfolk at the time. Carissa rang Pete 22 times to let him know she was in labour, but not earlier. In the end, she gave up and had to get April to go find Pete to tell him his baby daughter had been born. Pete then hurried to Sydney to be with Carissa and Taj and meet baby Mim. Corey Nobbs and Taj picked Pete up from the airport after he landed in Sydney around 9 a.m. on one of Presholt's early flights. They made a quick stop off for one on the way, but they didn't end up arriving at the hospital until after lunch. Googly-eyed Pete found baby Mim having her first bath, and his first comment was, "Holy fuck, look at her feet." From that day on, a special bond was formed as Mim became Daddy's little girl. Like Taj, Mim had inherited her dad's good looks and quick wit, but also his outgoing nature, his fear of missing out, and his lifelong habit of always being the last to leave anywhere. A few New Years back, Carissa dropped Pete and the kids down Kingston for the New Year's Eve celebrations. Taj called Carissa for a lift home well before the clock even struck midnight, but young Mim wouldn't go home then. No, she stayed until the end, like Pete, afraid she might mess something if she start. Pete was a proud and loving dad who adored his two children. He was especially proud of them in the last 12 months as they both represented Norfolk off Island, Taj for touch footy and Mim for netball. This had particular significance to Pete as he too had gone away to represent Norfolk for sport in his youth. Pete had his love for Taj and Mim tattooed on his arms, where he and others could see it every day. Taj on his right arm and Zaya on his left. But Pete wanted each arm to really represent each child, so he later let Taj and Mim choose what else would be tattooed on their respective arms. Knowing he didn't have too much longer to live, Pete was stoked when Harvey went out of his way recently to complete the tattoos, meaning Pete could take them with him to his grave. Pete was sentimental like that, and he was so grateful to his mate for making it happen. In June 2011, on Taj's third birthday, Pete and his family moved into Julie's house on Hemus Road. Pete and Caris took out a mortgage together to do renovations, and they've lived together in their family home ever since. Over the last 14 years, Pete, Caris, Taj and Mim spent a lot of time travelling as a family to familiar places in Australia and New Zealand where they often visited family and friends. On these trips, they created memories that will last forever. During this time, Pete held a few more jobs, working for Carver Restoration down Kingston, for Desiree at BC Excavations, and later for Mammy at Dialer Digger. Pete also worked the ship for several years in the lighter with Weed and Adrian Evans, and after those two finished up, he was stoked to be promoted to skipper, and he continued to work the ship for a few more years. Pete's last stretch of employment was working for Nath and his older cousin Susie at Quintal Earth Moving, starting in 2020, when they came to Norfolk to complete the airport runway upgrade. During this time, when Pete was 40 years young, his life unexpectedly changed forever, along with the lives of all of those around him. On September 12th, 2021, after an unexplainable and incurable 15-day headache, Pete was flown to the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital to investigate. Pete had surgery 5 days later. Then 4 days after that, on September 21st, Pete was given the shattering news that he had brain cancer. This was 4 days before Carissa's 40th birthday. This was the start of just over 3 years of ongoing surgeries, treatments and trips to the mainland. Along with the support of so many close family and friends, Pete fought hard, always with a positive attitude and that wicked sense of humour, as he defied many odds over these 3 years. Most admirable was when, even through the worst of it, Pete was always adamant that he couldn't complain because there was always someone worse off than him. After the airport upgrade was complete in 2022, the Quintal Earth Moving team returned to the Gold Coast, while Pete stayed on Norfolk and began managing the Norfolk side of the business for Nath and Suze. Pete both worked and managed the business while also receiving surgeries and treatment. Pete continued to work for Nath both on and off Norfolk until November last year, when he was no longer able to work at all. I'm told that during this time Pete also became the unofficial financial manager of Cut Loose Contracting. As with all his other jobs over the years, Pete was a hard worker, and here he brought laughter and good times to yet another workplace. In more recent times, however, the Tintola crew all dreaded whenever Pete's chemo week would come round. He would still go to work, but the chemo would make Pete tired. As soon as he'd start yawning on the job, everyone else would too, and then they'd all blame poor Pete for giving them all a hilly. Pete had worked hard all his life and rarely took a day off, so it was difficult for him to adjust to no longer working late last year when his illness had progressed significantly. A bit confused early one morning, Pete rang Nath to say, "I'm coming to work, Brad," which then confused Nath because Pete had finished working on doctor's advice and was also no longer meant to drive. Anyway, he jumped in his truck, his eyesight pretty poor at this stage, and drove himself to Pawpaw's to buy a packet of butts on his way to work. Thankfully at Pawpaw's though, Pete decided he just couldn't make it to work that day, so he turned around and drove himself back home. Meanwhile, Caris was still in bed and hadn't even realised he'd gone. On the 10th of July this year, Pete decided it was time to be admitted to the Norfolk Island Hospital. Although Caris was right there and could have taken him, he called his good mate Zahn to take him instead. Zahn was there in a flash, as always, to support not only Pete, but also Caris. Pete spent the last 4 months being cared for by the incredible staff at the hospital, along with his incredible family and friends. From the start of Pete's illness, he and Carissa were supported by an army of family and friends, right until the very end. Carissa is so grateful to everyone for their love, support and strength, and would like to personally give special, massive thanks to Nathan, Suze, Carl, Mammy, Brogan, April and Geek, Bart and Lance, and Princess and Jode. From a young age, Pete had dealt with much death throughout his short lifetime. The son of Norfolk Cemetery sexton, he had seen and heard more than most. On top of this, Pete faced many personal losses over the years. Despite the good times, the fun and the laughter, Pete was a sensitive soul who felt things very deeply. The losses of his beloved grandparents, his uncles, his darling Bridie, and more recently his mum, and other good mates along the way, all took their toll on Pete as he processed each loss and pain. However, from a young age, Pete accepted the things he couldn't change, and his attitude was always, "It is what it is." Despite the many blows he received and the pains he carried, he always picked himself back up and continued sharing his love of life with the world. Facing his own death, Pete was an absolute champion, admired and loved by all those who had the honour of spending time with him. Pete was Pete, right until the very end. Still with a mean sense of humour and a colourful vocabulary, Pete continued to give people grief, including the nurses, sometimes even flicking them the bird. Mim also copped the bird the night before Pete passed away, but of course, quick as a flash, Mim gave it right back to him. Pete was still socialising even a couple of weeks ago when he attended netball's annual mix comp in memory of his beloved Brittany. But he didn't just attend, he partied like it was 1999, doing sambuca and jelly shots in the back of the ambulance. Yes, Pete did all he could to live his best life right until the end. Over the last 3 years, Carissa has been Pete's rock. She was his partner, his best friend, his carer, his support, often his nurse, sometimes his doctor, and always his biggest advocate. Carissa fought hard for Pete. He knew this and he appreciated all that she did. In the end, there was nothing left unsaid or undone, which is probably why now the only thing Carissa can think to say to Pete is, thanks for loving her and always being there for her through all the shit. In the end, Pete was surrounded and cared for by all those he loved, and Mim had the great honour of feeding her dad his very last meal. To quote Robert Louis Stevenson, the man is a success who has lived well, loved much and laughed often, who has gained the respect of intelligent men and the love of children, who leaves the world better than he found it, and who looked for the best in others and gave the best he had. Based on this, I think it's more than fair to say that Pete is a success. He lived well and laughed often. Pete was genuine, humble, and never missed an opportunity to enjoy the best life. Pete was genuine, humble, and never missed an opportunity to enjoy the best life had to offer, or to give life the very best of himself. If there was a good time to be had, Pete would be there, often even long after he should have gone home. Pete certainly loved much and received a lifetime of love in return, from his parents, step-parents, grandparents, siblings, uncles, aunties, cousins, nieces, great-nephews, great-nieces, and all the close friends that Pete made throughout the many different stages of his life. But the biggest loves of Pete's life were his children Taj and Mim, and of course Carissa, who he shared 25 years of life with, his best friend and life partner. Together they faced the very best and worst of life. And Pete has definitely left this world better than he found it, because our lives are all the better for having had Pete in them. It will be a very long time before his light ever fades. Well, Pete, this is certainly the longest you've ever let me talk without telling me to shut up, and it's been my absolute honour to have been able to press your buttons one last time. We all know you've got a lot of special people waiting for you up there, and we have no doubt that you and Bridie are already into the sambuca shots together. Thanks for being you. Take care, keep smiling, and try not to get into too much trouble up there until we all meet you again, my friend.
Well, I must say, if you didn't know Peter before, you certainly do now. Now's the time for the floral tributes. We'll pause there for a moment of reflection on Pete's life while floral tributes are laid. Family, please come first. I'll go first, followed by the others who wish to lay a tribute to Pete.
How long will I slide or separate my side? I don't believe it's been slitting my throat is all I am. I heard your voice through a photograph. I thought that I've been brought up the past. Once you know you can never go back, I gotta take it on the other side. The centuries are what it meant to me. A cemetery where I marry the sea. A stranger thing that never changed my mind. I gotta take it on the other side. Take it on the other side. Take it on. Take it on. How long will I slide? Separate my side. I don't believe it's fair. Slitting my throat is all I am. Pour my life into a paper cup. The ashes full and I'm spilling my guts. You wanna know, am I still a slut? I gotta take it on the other side. The skyline started and she's in my bed. A candidate for the soulmate blend. Push the trigger and pull the thread. I gotta take it on the other side. Take it on the other side. Take it on. Take it on. How long will I slide? Separate my side. I don't believe it's fair. Sitting my throat is all I am. Forever to touch you, 'cause I know that you feel me somehow. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be, and I don't wanna go.
Thank you, everybody. What a great tribute. Now we come to the committal. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose here on earth. A time to be born, and a time to die. It saddens at the passing of Peter David Quintal, but with appreciation of his life, we remember and acknowledge the significance and value Peter has brought to our lives, as well as that of his mother, Kay Sandra Quintal Harvey, whose ashes are interred today to lie here with her son Peter. But now it's time to say a final goodbye, committing Peter's body to the ground. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and thus committing Peter's memory to our hearts for the rest of our days. In love we leave Peter, in peace with his mother, and with respect we bid them both farewell.
And I found out a long time ago what a woman can do to your soul. Oh, but she can't take you anyway. You don't already know how to go. And I got a peaceful, easy feeling, and I know you won't let me down, 'cause I'm already standing on the ground.
And ladies and gents, that brings us to the conclusion of the service today. But before I do go, just a few thanks I'd like to pass on behalf of the family. Peter's family would like to sincerely thank everyone who has helped Peter or the family during his course of illness. Massive special thank you to the Norfolk Island Hospital staff and the staff at the Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital for the love and care shown to Peter and his family. To Shane, very hard Shane, and all the grave diggers, the wreath makers, mound decorators, which is beautiful. Even the sunflowers are starting to wilt in sympathy of Pete. Tardy for taking his mate, Peter, on his last drive. Jody and Tony for the service sheets. Trent for the sound system. Thank you, Trent, worked well. Live stream by Kieran and Kevin. Another good job, Kieran, I believe. Everybody who's travelled from overseas, and there's been quite a few, as well as everybody who offered to help, called in, sent messages, made calls, cooked, cleaned, etc. And everyone else who has helped to make today go so smoothly. Finally, thank you to everyone for coming along today to support the family, and farewell, Pete. Following the service, and of course, you're invited to join Carissa, Taj and Mim at the Salty, so they continue to celebrate the life of their beautiful Peter. Thank you.
Yeah. It's my life. Long words, I guess.
Have you ever loved someone so much you giving on for? Not the expression, no, literally giving on for. When they know they're your heart and you know you are their armor, and you will destroy anyone who would try to harm her. But what happens when karma swings right around to bite you, and everything you stand for turns on you to spite you? What happens when you become the main source of a pain? Daddy, look what I made. Dad's gotta go catch a plane. Daddy, where's mommy? I can't find mommy. Where is she? I don't know. Go play. Haley, baby, your daddy's busy. Daddy's writing the song ain't gonna write itself. I give you one underdog and you gotta swing by yourself. Then turn right around in that song and tell her you love her, and put hands on her mother who's a spitting image of her. That's Slim Shady. Yeah, baby, Slim Shady's crazy. Shady made me, but tonight Shady's rock-a-bye baby. When I'm gone, just carry on, don't mourn, rejoice. Every time you hear the sound of my voice, just know that I'm looking down on you. smiling, and I didn't feel a dang. So baby, don't feel no pain, just smile back. When I'm gone, just carry on, don't mourn, rejoice. Every time you hear the sound of my voice, just know that I'm looking down on you, smiling, and I didn't feel a dang. So baby, don't feel no pain, just smile back. I keep having this dream, I'm pushing Haley on the swing. She keeps screaming, she don't want me to sing. You're making mommy cry. Why? Why is mommy crying? Baby daddy ain't leaving no more. Daddy, you're lying. You always say that. You always say this is the last time. But you ain't leaving no more. Daddy, you're mine. She's piling boxes in front of the door, trying to block it. Daddy, please. Daddy, don't leave. Daddy, no, stop it. Goes in the pocket, pulls out a tiny necklace locket. It's got a picture. This'll keep you safe, Daddy. Take it with you. I look up, it's just me standing in the mirror. These fucking walls must be talking, cause man, I can hear them. They're saying you got one more chance to do right, and it's tonight. Now go out there and show them that you love them, for it's too late. And just as I go to walk out of my bedroom door, it turns to a stage, they're gone, and the spotlight is on, and I'm singing. When I'm gone, just carry on, don't mourn, rejoice. Every time you hear the sound of my voice, just know that I'm looking down on you, smiling, and I give up forever to touch you, cause I know that you feel me somehow. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be, and I don't wanna go home right now. All I can taste is this moment, and all I can breathe is your life. Sooner or later, it's over. I just don't wanna miss you tonight. And I don't want the world to see me, cause I don't think that they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am. Can't fight the tears that ain't moment of truth in your life. When everything feels like the movies, yeah, you bleed just to know you're alive. And I don't want the world to see me, cause I don't think they'd understand. When everything's made to be broken, I just want you to know who I am.